come last because I had no idea what I was going to say. I must admit that I have thoroughly enjoyed the last contribution, which I think began to go to the heart of the matter, which is that higher education has become a business instead of a pursuit. Scholarship is no longer highly valued. I say that as somebody who went to university when he was 17, and I haven't left university yet, and that's more than half a century I've spent in universities. And that is really my main claim to be standing here, I suppose. But I think there is one criterion that we have to take into account that hasn't been mentioned. There were 800 years ago, there are now, I think, 83 institutions which occupy the same premises as they did 800 years ago and are conducting the same business as they did 800 years ago. Only one of those is a political organization. It's the Parliament of the Isle of Man, a very small island in the North Sea. 20-odd are religious institutions. 43 are universities. The universities have survived, and they survive for a very, very long time, if they stay faithful to their pursuit. And the pursuit is not the pursuit of wealth, it's the pursuit of knowledge. And by and large, universities have survived because they don't put a price on knowledge. Intellectual property is not something which was ever mentioned in the first 20 years of my university career. It is now, and now you have businessmen who insist that you actually try to establish your commercial right to property, so that for the past 7 years in Pakistan, we have been using the electronic marking systems which you have now marketed. We don't market them, we just use them and we give them to anybody else that wants them, because we're an educational institution. We're not a business institution. The point I wanted to make was that time is of the essence. When I first was asking the question as a dean, what in fact is the criterion by which you evaluate a degree, the answer was time. If the degree takes 3 years after school, then that's a bachelor's degree. And if you add another 2 years to that, that becomes a master's degree. And if you add another 3 years to that, that becomes a PhD. Beyond that, you can't actually specify. So that the assessment problem, which you say can be solved, and which I agree can be solved, I've spent my life in assessment, but it can only be solved if you have clear, explicitly stated purposes. Then you can assess. But the whole point about the intellectual adventure is that there are no clear, explicitly stated purposes. What you're really looking for in a university is those few people who can see things in a different way, who don't draw the boundaries in the same place as other people do. They have no clear, explicitly stated purposes. And sometimes they come good, and mainly they don't. But it doesn't matter, because if there are enough of them come good, you end up having an Oxford or a Cambridge or a Harvard or what on earth have you. And these institutions know what they're doing. So what they're looking for is the best students that are available. And I had thought that what all of you would be talking about would be the brain drain. Now, it may be that the search for national standards is actually to avoid the brain drain. But it doesn't sound like it. It sounds much more like we will draw standards which will allow you, the student, to know that you can move out and you can go to a more prosperous economy and you can live better. So that universities nowadays, the top universities, are not really interested in measuring output, but they're very interested in measuring input. They're not saying that they can add value. What they're saying is they can select value and then provide opportunities. They provide not virtual laboratories, but actual laboratories. And that's a big difference between an actual and a virtual laboratory. But it's an expensive thing. And so only a few people have access to it. And so universities are expensive. And we're bound to get two layers of universities. One of the things that really strikes me about the situation at the moment in the UK is that apart from Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, and perhaps Edinburgh, to get into any of the other universities is actually easier than to become a plumber. To become a plumber is a real struggle. You better know a plumber. I mean, it would be even better to be related to a plumber. It's not that you need great intellectual capacity, but you do need the right connections. Plumbing is as yet nepotistic. It depends on who you know. It is also ridiculously profitable. So your average plumber will have a Lamborghini, £150,000 worth of car. Now, he doesn't actually come to do your plumbing in the Lamborghini. He has a little white van that he comes to do your plumbing in. But when you get the bill, you know about the Lamborghini. I mean, because you're paying for that Lamborghini. So being a plumber is a highly desirable activity. Very, very difficult to get into because it's not regulated. The admission is not regulated. And one of the things which universities have given to the education system is the regulation of admission on the basis of other than who you know. It's by no means perfect. Still, there are just 8 schools in the UK who supply 40% of the entry to Oxford. So there's nothing particularly egalitarian about that at all, especially when you consider the other 60% or 50% come from overseas. So there are very, very few opportunities to get into Oxford from an ordinary school. But by and large, you can now get admission on the basis of merit to universities. And that is their great benefit to the education system, apart from the creation of knowledge, which is a bit arcane, but for ordinary people, their contribution is that they do control standards. So you were worried, that was my one exception, otherwise an admirable presentation, You were worried about a university setting standards in Nepal. That has been the traditional function of universities, has been to set standards for the education system. The education system only begins to go badly wrong when governments set the standards for the education system, because governments, of course, are also the suppliers. So you've got no control. So what you want is an autonomous university system which looks after the education system. And that, I think, is its major contribution to society at large, to the ordinary person. Because the person who enjoys the fruits of research, they're very few. We enjoy the spin-offs from the fruits of research, but the fruits of research we usually don't understand. And that's why there are no standards, because we can't set standards for those rare intellects who are actually understanding the roots of a subject. So that's it as far as I'm concerned. I obviously speak as somebody who has a great interest in school education and a great feeling that it is universities who must be counted to make sure that school education does its job. Thank you.